Number 1. The house. There was a house that my family lived in for about a year, when I was a teenager, that I really didn't like. At first, I really didn't know what it was that bothered me about it. However, from the beginning, there was something about the house that rubbed me the wrong way. I was sort of scared being alone in that house to a degree. It was not a terrifying feeling, though, and I didn't try to avoid being in the house alone. Especially when my father and stepmom would go to visit relatives and I didn't have to go with them. However, on those days, my dad would have a whole lot of beer, and when he did that, he would always overstay his welcome and not get back until really, really late. And that was okay with me. This was in the late 1980s. I was 14 years old, and we lived in a beautiful house. It had a full-sized but unfinished basement, but it was a bit dark and freaky down there because it was completely underground. The walls were cinder blocks. There were a lot of boxes and some old furniture down there. There was nothing really scary in there, but there was just something about it. I wasn't really scared of the dark, but there was something about being down there when I was by myself that I didn't like. I always felt like there was someone or something watching me from behind the furniture. But the worst part was going up the stairs. It was a wooden staircase that creaked. I always wanted to run up the stairs because I felt something was behind me and wanted to chase me. But it was worse because I also thought that a hand would reach up from between one of the boards of the steps and grab my ankle as I ran up. The only reason any of that is important to the story, though, is to give you some idea of what it was like to live in that house. It was also sitting on top of a hill, on a ridge, in a huge yard. At night, you would always know someone was driving toward the house, because you would be able to see it atop one of the other hills, before it descended, and then ascended, up the several hills that it had to in order to get to the house. I wasn't the only person who was scared of that basement either. My sister, who was 5 years younger than I was, could be absolutely terrified of it. But also, being a 9-year-old at the time, she had a much more active imagination and belief in scary things. She was more specific about what she thought was going after her in the basement, though, than I was. She insisted it was an old witch who lived down there and hid behind the stairs and the furniture. It was a pretty chilling thought. But despite the fact that the house could be very creepy sometimes, I did like living there. And being 14, I enjoyed the time that I could spend in the house alone. I found myself rarely going to visit relatives and often remaining home by myself. And it was late on a summer night when I had the scariest experience ever in that house. I was sitting in the living room. Our couch was against the back wall, and the TV was parallel from the wall. To the left of the couch was a very large picture window. That was from where you would be able to see down the driveway and able to see other cars driving on the hills towards you. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning. I was watching TV with the lights off. I think the show was Freddy's Nightmares, an anthology horror show that was hosted by the character Freddy Krueger. It wasn't really that scary, but I enjoyed watching it, mostly for Robert Englund. I never knew when my parents would get home, but whenever I noticed a set of headlights out of the corner of my eye, I instinctively turned my head and looked out the big picture window. I don't remember what the show was about, but I was watching it pretty intently. And then, there was a flash of light outside at a distance, and I assumed it was a car, so I quickly turned my head to see if it was my parents' car. Now, this happened really quickly. As I turned my head to the left, I noticed a dark shadow in the dark corner to the left of the TV. It barely registered as I was trying to see if the car was coming. However, whatever that light was, it was definitely not my parents' car. But as the realization hit me that it was not the car, what I had seen in the corner next to the TV also registered with me. My head jerked back to the right to look directly in that corner. And although it was dark, I saw an old, scraggly woman standing in the corner. She was wearing a black dress. She had long, unkempt gray hair. She was holding her hands together in a ball in front of her, and the worst part was that she was looking directly at me. Startled, I jumped into a crouched position on the couch, my feet underneath me. I quickly scanned my eyes across the room, looking to see if there was anyone else other than the old woman in the room. I quickly noticed that there wasn't, and I returned my gaze to the corner that she had been standing in, and when I did, she was no longer there. I wasn't sure how to react. For who knows how long, I remained on the couch, still with my feet on the cushions. My eyes scanned everywhere in the room and the hallway again, wondering if the woman had quickly darted somewhere. However, I cannot figure out how she would have done that. Part of me wanted to go run and turn the lights on, while the other didn't want to move from the couch. Well, I backed myself into a corner on the couch, and I kept watching TV. We didn't have a remote-controlled TV back then, so I didn't get up to change the channels. I simply remained on the couch waiting until my parents got home. I couldn't get the picture of that woman out of my head, though. Although seeing her was scary, it wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was realizing that the scraggly old woman looked like a witch, and remembering that my sister had always claimed to see a witch in the basement, hiding behind the stairs and the furniture. Number 2. The Well. I've always approached matters of the supernatural from a very specific viewpoint. I don't believe people are lying to me when they tell me about encounters that they have had. There are many things that can be explained as supernatural seeming, but really aren't. So I tend to believe the stories, but not that they are otherworldly in any way. If there was objective proof that something supernatural occurred, I would take that proof at face value at the time that it was presented. I just felt I needed to get that out of the way. This story appears to be supernatural in nature, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is, and there could be other explanations for what had happened to me. This happened when I was a teenager, and it was the first time that I was left home alone in a new house. We had moved into the neighborhood about 6 months before this took place. I was 15 at the time. I had switched schools in the middle of the school year, so I really hadn't had any time to make new friends, but I was fine with that. My family went off to visit relatives. I didn't go. I don't recall exactly why I didn't go, only that it was my choice not to. I wouldn't claim that our house was out in the country. It was out of town, but not really in a very rural setting. We did have a well in our backyard, or actually it was more like a lot. It was a large field behind our house, but it was supposedly part of the property. There was an old-timey looking well in that field, just like you see in a cartoon or a horror movie. I'm not the type of person who scares very easily, so I wasn't worried at all at being home by myself for a few days. And while I was at home, I spent most of my time in the darkened living room watching stuff on television. On the third night I was in the house, I was staying up late and watching something on late-night television. It was nothing out of the usual. I definitely remember that it was nothing scary, so my imagination hadn't been worked up. Around 2 in the morning, I went to let our dog out into the backyard. There was also nothing unusual about that. The dog went around, did what it had to do, and then came back to the house. I gave her a treat, which was customary, and then went to close the door. "Bradley!" I thought I heard a voice whispering my name behind me as I turned back into the house. It was very eerie and caused me to turn around. It had seemed like someone had whispered it right in my ear, but when I whirled around, nothing was out there. The light was on in the backyard. I scanned the yard, as far as the light would allow me to do. Other than the back porch light, however, there was no other light source out there. There was not even a moon out that night, and I didn't see anyone out there. I got one of those chills. I'm sure you know the ones I'm talking about. It is involuntary, and it begins in your spine until a shiver just racks your entire body. But it is also over nearly as quickly as it begins. So I turned and went back to walk into the house again. "Bradley!" I heard the voice whisper in my ear again. This time, I jumped and quickly turned back to look behind me. Just as before, my eyes scanned everywhere in the backyard. While the first time I heard the whisper, I could have written it off as my imagination. I knew that this time I had heard it for sure. After once again not seeing anything or anyone out in the yard, I turned once again to go back into the house. However, this time, I was a lot less comfortable than I was the first time. I went into the house quickly, locked the screen door, shut the back door, and then both locked and bolted that door. I stood there for a moment and realized the kitchen window, which was facing the backyard, was opened. So I went to close it, and when I leaned over to push the window closed, I heard it a third time. "Bradley," as a whisper. I shut the window quickly and locked it. I turned on the lights in the kitchen, in the hallway, in the living room, and everywhere in the house that I would be going. I had heard someone whispering my name 3 times. The only comfort I had was that each time it had come from outside of the house, so I felt good locking myself in. I tried to go back to the TV and do my best to relax. It wasn't easy at first, and every time I thought I had noticed something out of the corner of my eye, out of one of the windows, I found myself jumping and paranoid. It took a long time before I was relaxed enough that I was able to concentrate on anything else. I don't think that I was able to fully relax at any point during the night, although I did my best to try to. I eventually fell asleep on the couch in the living room while I was watching something on TV, but my sleep was not the calmest. The following day, I decided that in the light of day, I should go out and look around in the backyard, in the field behind it. I didn't really like going out in the field because it was not mowed or kept in any way. There was a lot of brush, briars, and thorns, but for some reason I felt that in order to be as thorough as I could, that I should really look back through it too. When I saw the well, which was boarded up on the top, I felt a strange and very foreboding feeling. Yeah, that could have had something to do with the prominent place wells have in scary stories. It could have just been because it was a crumbling relic from the past. I don't know, but it made me feel very uneasy. I turned to go ahead and walk back to the house. As I turned with my back to the well, I heard it one last time. I had a voice whisper, "Bradley," in my ear behind me. I simply ran, faster than I had ever ran before. I got into my house and locked myself in, and anything else got locked out. Well, I have no idea if what happened was related to that well. I never went back to it again. I never heard that whisper again. I have never heard any stories about the well, such as a child dying in it, or anything like that. All I know is what I heard that day, and that was enough to keep me away from it. Number 3. Giggles. I was walking home from a friend's house when I was younger, when I had a very scary experience. This was in the summer, and plus it was during the daytime as well. We lived far out on a rural route in the hills, so far out that it took like a 90-minute bus drive from home to school and back again. Most of the kids in the school didn't live out in the country like we did, they lived in town. So the bus that came and got us never had a whole lot of children in it. Furthermore, the houses out there were not very close together. My buddy Joey was the closest friend I had, and even getting to his place was quite the trek. Occasionally, we would get one of our parents to take us to the other's house, but more often than not, we would walk to the other's house. During the summertime, because we would spend the night at each other's house, and also because we were off school and our parents were at work, we would very often have to walk to the other's house in order to do anything. The previous night, I had stayed the night at Joey's house. We had played some video games and watched some scary movies. You know, the typical thing that 13-year-old boys like to do. But I knew the next day both of my parents would be at work, so I had to get home around 1 p.m. at the very latest in order to check on our dog. It was a clear and very bright day. I was walking along the gravel road. There were ditches dug on both sides of the road, and beyond the ditches, varied amounts of trees and bushes and such. At some points it was very easy to see out into the hills, but at other times any view was blocked by the branches. It was a hot summer day. I heard the strangest noise as I was walking. I was used to all the sounds of the country, and I had lived out there all my life. This sounded like a human giggling loudly, though. Although there was some animals out there who could make human-like noises, this was not one that I had heard before. This absolutely sounded like there was someone in the woods giggling. It caused me to stop for a moment and look around. I couldn't tell exactly where it had come from, just up in the woods someplace. I started walking again, and then suddenly I felt something hit me in the back of the head. It smarted pretty bad, and I reached up to feel my head where I'd gotten hit. Looking at my hand, there was a little bit of blood on my hand, but only a really small bit. I assumed whatever hit me had been a rock, but there was so much gravel on the road, I didn't try to look for it. I started walking again, and then once again I heard that weird giggling coming from out in the forest somewhere. I only stopped for a moment, looking around at the surroundings and wondering just what was going on that afternoon. As I began walking, I once again felt something hit me in the back of the head. This time the pain was a lot sharper, and I almost stumbled over when it happened. Distressed, I looked around, hoping to see where the hit had come from. This time, by looking on the ground, I saw a piece of gravel with a little bit of blood on it, and then I immediately guessed it had to be my blood. I went to pick up the rock and look at it. As I was holding it, I heard the giggling sound for a third time. It was too much at that point. It was just very creepy, and I had no idea what was going on, so I just dropped the rock and began running up the hill. I ran all the way until I was at the driveway to our house. At that point, I was getting cramps running too hard, and I had to slow down. But I was still scared, and I wanted to get inside before I heard that giggling again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope everyone had a good holiday season. If you don't celebrate the holidays, I'm hoping that you still had a nice couple of weeks. I'm going to be doing some different things this upcoming year, but it should all be good. I'm going to try to work out a schedule for videos to be released on, which I should have done a long time ago, and I'm going to add more videos and types of videos going forward. Once I have it all figured out better, I will put up a video updating you. Maybe tell me about content you want to see. Please subscribe and share the video if you haven't already, and send me any original stories if you have them. But as usual, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.